The Apollo moon missions ended because extraterrestrial space aliens prevented the U.S. Navy bases on the moon. According to William Tompkins, the U.S. Navy planned to put 10,000 people on the moon in the early 1970s as part of a secret lunar base program that was to be established through the NASA Apollo program. According to William Tompkins, a top aerospace designer who worked for major NASA corporate contractors during the Apollo era, the covert Navy plan came to a crushing end during the Apollo 11 mission when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were met by a fleet of menacing extraterrestrial spacecraft. Tompkins' account of what really happened on the moon is explained in his recently published autobiography, Selected by Extraterrestrials, the title. At the time of the moon landing, Tompkins worked for TRW, a leading aerospace corporation that built the first NASA satellite Pioneer 1. TRW was responsible for the range of critical components used in Apollo spacecraft, and its personnel were in the Operations Center for Apollo missions. Tompkins was a TRW employee from July 1967 to March 1971 and describes his role in helping design the Launch Operations Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida. Earlier, during the final 2 years of his 12-year employment at the Douglas Aviation Company, 1950 to 1963, Tompkins' innovative designs for planned Apollo missions had greatly impressed Dr. Kurt Debus. In July 1962, Debus had become the first director of NASA's Launch Operations Center, renamed Kennedy Space Center after JFK assassination, a position he held until his retirement in November 1974. In 1963, Debus appointed Tompkins to a working group for the Future Launch Operations Center, and the two men held many confidential meetings over the future of the Apollo program, and they discussed its real mission as part of an ambitious Navy space program called NOVA, N-O-V-A. It was called NOVA for secretly establishing military garrisons on the Moon, Mars, and nearby star systems. The Apollo landings were only the first stage of an ambitious four-stage plan for NOVA. Stage 2 of NOVA was to put 10,000 people on the Moon's surface. Stage 3 was to place bases on Mars and other planetary bodies in the solar system. Finally, Stage 4 was to place many Navy bases in 12 adjoining star systems. Of course, in the interview, it doesn't talk about the logistics of how people will survive on the Moon and Mars. Now we know the Moon doesn't have air, okay, and where it doesn't have water, it doesn't have food available, so how are these problems going to be dealt with? The same thing with Mars colonies. Now, to support his radical claims, Tompkins provided several documents in his autobiography. The first is a 1963 Douglas Aviation Company study of the launch vehicles to be used in the covert NOVA program. And the second is an April 15, 1963 memorandum from the Douglas Aviation Company, and it confirms Tompkins' appointment by Dr. Debus to the Launch Operations Center and the designs he was working on for NASA. And Tompkins describes what he designed for Apollo missions in NOVA. As engineering section chief, I conceived dozens of missions and spaceship designs for exploratory operations to the planets that orbit our nearest stars. I designed a station to be built on Mars, massive NOVA vehicles, and equatorial launching facilities. I also designed multiple 2,000-man military bases for our Moon. I designed the checkout and launch test system for the Apollo Moon Saturn V, SIV-1B, and reassembly with the Common Control Moon Vehicle, a near-complete redesign of the major facilities operations for the entire launch control. And during the Apollo 11 moon landing in July 1969, Tompkins says he was in the NASA Launch Operations Center at Cape Canaveral as part of a large TRW contingent. He states that television cameras from the Apollo lander provided a live feed of what was being witnessed by Armstrong and Aldrin. Tompkins explained how Armstrong and Aldrin were met by a fleet of extraterrestrial spaceships that were ominously close to the Apollo lunar lander. He said the landing module LEM actually impacted the moon's surface in the Sea of Tranquility crater, which had tremendous size vehicles parked around part of its rim, meaning extraterrestrial craft, that is. When astronaut Neil Armstrong made the first step for man on the moon, he looked up at the edge of a crater and said to the mission control, "There are other ships here, they are enormous." The public did not hear that statement nor see the massive alien starships. Armstrong panned his camera in a 360-degree motion all around the crater, and the CIA then classified the information as way above top secret. Tompkins drew a picture of what he witnessed on the Apollo live feed camera along with other TRW and NASA personnel. And this is his drawing of it. Now, how this extraterrestrial action effectively put an end to the covert Navy plan, thereby ending its support for the Apollo program, is described this way by Tompkins. The extraterrestrials put up their no trespassing sign, but allowed us to make several other additional Apollo landings to pick up a few rocks and play in the sand. The action of the extraterrestrials stopped our plans to build our manned naval base on the moon. This is on his book, Selected by Extraterrestrials, page 428. What Tompkins claims he saw via the NASA live feed of the moon landing is consistent with ham radio intercepts of the live feed and the claims of former NASA employee Otto Bender. According to Bender, the Apollo 11 astronauts transmitted that they were being watched by large alien vehicles. Bender confirmed that ham radio operators had indeed intercepted VHF signals transmitted from Apollo 11 to NASA's Houston headquarters with the following message, which NASA screened from the public. Mission Control, what's there? Mission Control calling Apollo 11. Apollo 11, these babies are huge, sir, enormous. Oh God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon watching us. In an August 27, 2012 blog post, Dr. Stephen Greer revealed that he spoke with close relatives of both Armstrong and Aldrin, who had been told the truth about what the astronauts had seen on the moon. Quote, close friends and very close family members of both Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin have separately told me that indeed there were numerous large UFOs around the crater where the lunar module landed, and that these were seen by both Armstrong and Aldrin. I have also spoken to military officers that have seen the footage of this event, but it has never been made public, he said. Greer's testimony is significant since it supports Tompkins' claim that there was a live video feed recording what Armstrong and Aldrin were seeing. So why did NASA eventually terminate the Apollo missions if extraterrestrial visitors were there and watching the Earth? The answer, according to Armstrong, is relayed by an unnamed professor at a NASA symposium, and it's as follows. Professor, what really happened out there with Apollo 11? Armstrong. It was incredible, of course. We had always known there was a possibility. The fact is we were warned off. There was never any question then of a space station or a moon city. Professor, how do you mean warned off? Armstrong, I can't go into details except to say that their ships were far superior to ours, both in size and technology. Boy, they were big and menacing. No, there is no question of the space station. Professor, but NASA had other missions after Apollo 11. Armstrong, naturally, NASA was committed at that time and could not risk a panic on Earth, but it really was a quick scoop and back again. Now, the unnamed professor was first quoted by Timothy Good in his groundbreaking book, Above Top Secret, written in 1987, and he corroborates Tompkins' claim that NASA was warned off the moon and that there were plans to build a moon city. The city was in fact planned to be a U.S. Navy base that was not part of the NOVA program. The extraterrestrial occupants and the large starships intimidating the Apollo 11 mission did not want the U.S. establishing a beachhead for future military bases on the moon by preventing the U.S. Navy in moving forward with its plan to put 10,000 people on the moon using a number of NOVA rocket launchers throughout the 1970s. the NOVA program effectively came to a crushing end in July 1969. It would take the U.S. Navy more than a decade before it could complete the construction of its first anti-gravity space vehicles as part of its Solar Warden program. According to Tompkins and other whistleblowers, the first U.S. Navy space battle groups were deployed in the early 1980s during the Reagan administration, thereby establishing a U.S. Navy presence in deep space for the first time. And this was by Michael Sala, and it's Unbedded Reality. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.